Well, this is really fun to be with you. Oh my goodness. Kudos to you for coming out on a Saturday morning. Sure. The Friday night crowd, that's a party night. This is something to do. There's probably big something to do here in this area. You don't have much action here in the Vancouver region, right? But the Saturday morning crew, you people are the real deal, right? So I check the internet before I come up here because, you got to check the internet because it's the source of all truth. And I check, weather.com, find out if it's raining or not. Duh, like I had to check weather.com. So I check it, and up pops this bear alert. Now, you probably experience this all the time. We don't get bear alerts, in Southern California. In fact, check this out. I printed it. So the Forest Service has issued a bear warning for this region. Do you actually worry about these things? This is just stunning. And they're urging everyone to protect themselves by wearing bells and carrying pepper spray. Which worried me because I thought maybe everybody's packing pepper spray in the audience, This campers and hikers should be alert for signs of fresh bear activity. And they should be able to tell the difference between black bear dung and grizzly bear dung. Another area of expertise for you, right? Stunning. In fact, they actually help you out. They go, black bear dung is rather small and round. Sometimes you can see fruit seeds and or squirrel fur in it. Grizzly bear dung has bells in it and smells like pepper spray. I'm just saying. Hey, special greetings from Biola University. A lot of the teachers have at least some association with Biola University. It's Biola is a great place, but it just turns out on rare occasion, a whole group of people sort of bond together in a particular discipline, and we just got a whole bunch of Christian philosophers and Christian apologists and Christian thinkers who really believe the Bible is true and believe that Jesus really did come back from the dead and believe that it's reasonable to believe in the existence of God and so on. Who would have thought? And we're all kind of gathered in one spot. We're hoping to spread the wealth. I mean, that's the goal, not to keep it all locked into Southern California, but to bring it elsewhere. But special greetings from Biola University. I've been there about 15 years, and I want to share this with you. When I first got there, my dear colleagues were introducing me to some of the ways of the campus, and they said, look, you can log onto the internet. That was still a big thing then, and you can monitor the activity of the students, They have chats on this thing. They do various postings. And sometimes they have some really wild and creative stuff. So I monitor this thing, and here's the first thing I logged into. It was a contest for the best theory on anything. That's pretty wide open, So I'm monitoring it for a few days, and finally they decide on the grand prize winner, and here it is. This endeared me to Biola students. This student writes, in the subject of thermodynamics. All right? Now, Biola doesn't have an engineering school, so this is particularly impressive. This student wrote, when a cat is dropped, it always lands on its feet. And when toast is dropped, it always lands buttered side down. I propose that we strap giant slabs of hot buttered toast to the back of 100 tethered cats. Right? The two opposing forces will cause the cats to hover. Spinning just inches above the ground. Using a giant buttered toast cat array, a high-speed monorail could easily link Los Angeles and Palm Springs, cutting hours off of our travel time during spring break, Okay, we don't have an engineering program, but we have an amazing creative writing program. So that's good. Well, a quick couple of commercials. If you've been prowling around the table, I don't know if anybody's introduced you to some of the materials out there, but a couple of wonderful pieces. I just got acquainted with this book by Chris Price and John Morrison on questions. They've really collected all the questions that people ask on a regular basis and decided to write some pithy, succinct, intelligent, and accessible answers to those. So check out this book. It really is hot off the press. And this one might actually be hotter off the press. Think and Live. This is a book of of edited transcripts from sizzling radio programs by the Apologetics.com folks who will be teaching in some of the breakouts, right? And Andy Steiger himself is one of them. So check this book out. I think you'll really enjoy this. There's a couple of books to look at. A DVD at the Biola table called Does God Exist? This is William Lane Craig, who's probably the finest evangelical Christian debater on the planet right now, debating Christopher Hitchens, all right? Now, the atheist blogs after the debate, which took place about a year and a half ago on the Biola campus, they said, this is the atheist blogs. You know, Christopher Hitchens, you know him, the very, very loudmouth atheist and very clever fellow, was spanked like an errant school child at Biola University. In my view, this was kind of like the turning point of the new atheist movement when Bill Craig took on Christopher Hitchens at Biola University. I only have a few more left on the table, so rush out. Those of you who are faster and stronger will prove some Darwinian principles this morning, right? And one last book. This is a book called Five Sacred Crossings. Thank you. Some of you have already read it and told me you enjoyed it. Thanks so much. This has been a blast. This is a book I wrote. I've written lots of stuff. Those academic tomes that only libraries buy. And then not only do they put them in the library, but they put them in the darkest and dankest part of the library so that nobody actually reads them. So I thought, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to write a novel that incorporates all of my most important points when I give popular lectures. And so I did that. It's called Five Sacred Crossings, and people actually read it. Who'd have thought, We academic folks write and stuff that people actually read, I mean, everywhere from community college professors to grandmothers who've never opened an apologetics text, and they've really enjoyed it. So, again, not a lot of them out there, but if we do run out, go to, Amazon.com, and you can buy a boatload of them. One last commercial. You've heard it said about Biola University and our Master of Arts degree programs in Christian apologetics. We got a first-rank distance learning master's program. And the dirty little secret in our department is we think our distance learning program is actually better than our on-campus program. So if you've been thinking about doing such a thing, no need to relocate to Southern California, although it's going to be 80 degrees there today. So you might want to consider it. I don't know. Just saying. So we have this wonderful Master of Arts degree. We have the finest faculty in the world on these topics. And if you want to just get a glimpse of what it's like, pick up this little card, go to our website and check it out. Those of you who have a background in science, we have a first-rank master's degree in science and religion. It's really something. It's becoming very popular, and it's also offered as a modular distance learning program. So it's the blue card out on the table. And just fill out an info card there. I'll be out there afterwards to talk to you if you want to talk about the programs or the books, you name it. All right, commercials done. Although I got to give a shout out to the Apologetics.com guys. Harry Edwards, Andy Steiger, Mikhail Del Rosario. You're going to be hearing from some of them at the breakout sessions, but they do marvelous work day in and day out. And if you want to support a great apologetics organization, Apologetics.com, they're really doing the hard work. So check out their website, and you'll really see what they're doing. And have we given a big round of applause to Andy Steiger, Nancy Steiger, and John Morrison yet? I know they got a whole team doing this, but thank you so much for all the hard work you've done putting this together. And hey, Jojo Ruba, are you out here? Jojo? There he is, way back there. If you want to know the apologetics guys in neighboring provinces, you got to know Jojo Ruba. In fact, I think we all ought to band together to really make a stink in Canada. Those who have started these kinds of works in other provinces and regions, we ought to get together and really do it big, because I think it's amazing. You just bring this fresh perspective to people. A whole bunch of Christians who actually know what they're talking about and can present it in winsome and attractive ways. It can actually change the landscape. It is great fun. A little bit more fun than we should be allowed to have. All right, on to the topic. So I did my doctoral work in religious studies at the University of California. That's not the place usually to go to strengthen your Christian faith, right? It's not usually the place you go. Strangely, my faith was strengthened, strangely. But I got a chance in doing this degree program to study, all of the great world religious traditions from stem to stern with great scholars in these traditions, with devotees on the ground and so on. Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Native American traditions, Mormonism, you name it. I got a chance to really dig into it. And I must say it ended up strengthening my Christian faith because it showed me that Christianity stands apart in dramatic fashion. In fact, that's the nature of my book, Five Sacred Crossings. It shows how Christianity stands apart, but it does it in a clever way, I think. But Christianity stands apart. Now, in the book, I actually outline 5 reasons, 5 sacred crossings, 5 reasons that Christianity stands apart. But let me give you just one this morning to sort of ground what I'm going to talk about in terms of the resurrection. Christianity stands apart from the other great religious traditions because it's testable. It's testable. For realsies, right? It's an academic term. It's testable. You can offer evidence for it, and you can offer evidence against it, and the evidence means something, right? You're thinking, well, can't other religions do that? No, not really. Sometimes they sound like they can do that. Sometimes you'll be talking with a Muslim or a Mormon or something, and it'll sound like they're making some sort of historical case, but when you push a little back or you make a counter argument, suddenly it becomes and you've probably seen it with Mormon missionaries, for instance. They'll take a step back and say, well, okay, you're making some good points there, but you have to understand something. Really, the truth of this lies in my heart. I prayed about it, and I had a feeling that it was true. So at that point, the evidence doesn't matter anymore. And I've seen this with almost every religious tradition. But in Christianity, although we do the same thing, we're not supposed to. You see, in fact, the text to look at here is 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and you've heard this referred to. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the Apostle Paul says something that I think is one of the strangest passages in all of religious literature. You don't find something like this in the Bhagavad Gita or the Buddhist Tripitaka or the Book of Mormon or the Quran. It comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and the Apostle Paul says it twice in this chapter. If you look through verses like 12 through 19, the apostle says, if Jesus did not come back from the dead, our faith is worthless. If Jesus did not come back from the dead, our faith is empty. It's of no effect. That automatically makes Christianity testable because you can dig into the issue of the resurrection and determine whether it's reasonable to believe it or not. And if it's not, according to the Apostle Paul, one of the most prolific writers in the New Testament, a purported eyewitness to the resurrected Jesus, if Jesus did not come back from the dead, we need to go do something else. I mean, you look like a nice bunch. Really, you do. I mean, we could continue to gather on Sunday mornings, which is the traditional day of resurrection. That's why we meet on Sunday mornings. But let's not meet in the name of the risen Jesus. I mean, we can call it a breakfast club. You can bring in waffle irons, and during strawberry season, we can bring in whipped cream, and it'll be great fun. Or we can all go to the golf course. There's all kinds of strange religious rituals that go on there, Whoever is furthest from the putt or furthest from the cup putts first, and there's even a kind of communion at the 19th hole, where people drink beer and eat pretzels and so on. But let's not pretend, according to the Apostle Paul. 1 Corinthians 15, one of the strangest passages in all of religious literature. Christianity is testable. Well, this idea actually unnerves people a good deal. So I went to a lecture from one of my old teachers. This must have been 20 years ago now. It was at a state university in Southern California, and they were having a big, very secular religion and philosophy conference. And some of the biggest names in religion and philosophy, and this is not an evangelical Christian gathering, folks. So they get together, and the plenary address given on Friday evening is by a guy named John Warwick Montgomery. He's a guy I studied under for a period of time. A brilliant guy. He's one of those guys with more degrees than a thermometer, And He's giving a talk, and I remember the title was The Quest for Absolutes, a Sherlockian Inquiry. Now, that'd make you rush out on a Friday night, wouldn't it? Yeah. Well, a bunch of academics with nothing to do, that was actually a hot ticket. So the room is a pretty big chemistry lecture hall, was filled, to capacity, standing room only. In fact, there's a big periodic table of the elements on the wall. It's very collegiate. It had those little desks that fold up and over, Room was jammed, standing room only. And Montgomery gets up there and he opens his briefcase after they introduce him, and he pulls out some papers and he blows on them, and dust flies off, This is all part of the drama. You see, he was doing a paper as if it were a long-lost manuscript written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of the Sherlock Holmes mystery stories. And Montgomery knows something about Sherlock Holmes. He was like the president of the Sherlock Holmes Society in London for years, So he really knew what he was talking about. So he reads this paper about Sherlock and Watson investigating religious claims. Well, you know how Sherlock and Watson would approach that. Only with the evidence, very careful reasoning from point 1 to point 2 to point 3, never straying from the evidence, always thinking clearly. I mean, that sounds like the way to go, right? Well, it unnerved everybody in the room. Because, in fact, there was a guy, I got there early, I was sitting in an aisle seat, and right across the aisle was a guy who... He's a tall, fair-skinned fellow, and I remember during Montgomery's presentation, his earlobes were turning several shades of deep purple. And he's twitching. And so they finish the lecture, and they call for questions. This guy doesn't even wait, He leaps to his feet. He forgot to fold back that little desk, though. So to this day, we don't know the actual pitch of his voice. He's shaking and he's twitching. Dr. Montgomery, you do tremendous damage to religion. That was the exact sound of the room at the time. Just like, it was like, what's he talking about? Well, it dawned on me really quickly what he was talking about. See, Montgomery had committed the unpardonable sin of religious studies in the secular realm. He had taken religion by the collar, and he had dragged it right into the spotlight of critical inquiry. He simply started asking the questions that we all want to ask, but it's just not polite in religious studies faculty meetings and so on. So he's asking the hard questions, and the only one left standing at the end was Christianity because it's testable. It actually makes claims and then backs them up. Well, you know where I'm going with this. What's the big claim? That Jesus died and came back from the dead. That's a very strange feature of Christianity. It really does set Christianity apart from the other great traditions, not because we claim somebody came back from the dead, but because the whole thing is hanging on that, right? It's like the whole of Christianity is hanging by this thread of the resurrection. And somebody's going to come along and go snip, and it's going to come crashing down, right? Well, it turns out that thread is made out of some super titanium alloy, that breaks any pair of scissors that gets near it. It's really remarkable how good the evidence is, and I want to talk about that. A couple other quick comments about this, how powerful just the very idea of testability is. I gave a lecture one time at the UCLA School of Medicine. You don't get a chance to do this very often. They call my office in Biola and say, hey, we're putting together a lecture series. One of the lectures is at around noontime near Easter. So we thought it would be fun to have one of you guys from Biola come out and give a lecture on, like the resurrection of Jesus. We thought that would be a hoot, So I said, I'm the guy for the job. So I remember driving out to UCLA thinking, this is good, because if dead people can come back to life, young medical students need to know something about that. So I get there, and they set me up in a lecture hall, and it's an anatomy lecture hall. You ever seen one of those that go like straight up in the sky, You people there would be like moved way in, and I'd be looking up at you. You're looking down at the slab from which I am lecturing, That is the place where they dissect stuff, Who knows what they were dissecting moments before? And so I knew this was a medical school crowd, some of the best and the brightest. And so I was going to use a lot of jokes or rhetorical flourish. And my outline for the talk was simply this. I provided evidence for this, that Jesus was alive at point A, he was dead at point B, and alive again at point C. They were stunned. I was stunned that they were stunned. This is a lunchtime lecture series. I could actually see what kind of sandwich they were eating because their mouths were hanging open. You're like, I was puzzled why they were so stunned. We only had a couple of minutes for Q&A, and then a whole gaggle of them rushed forward, and I really got a sense for why they were stunned, because they didn't expect this at all. I made it sound very different than they expected. In fact, one guy, I think he really kind of spoke for the group. He's like, hey, here's the deal. Yeah, this is really wild stuff. He goes, I grew up in a Baptist home. I memorized Bible verses. I won Awana badges and all this kind of stuff. He goes, but you're making it sound different. You're making it sound like it's true. He probably wasn't a philosophy major as an undergraduate, but he's struggling with the ideas. You're making it sound like I can know it to be true in the same way that I can know facts of science and history and facts at crime scene investigations and in courts of law. In other words, I can sink my knowledge teeth into this. This isn't just something that's reserved for some ethereal faith situation. It doesn't require any blind leaping. You're simply laying it out there, and we can embrace it or not based on the evidence. Like, you nailed it. That's the thing I'm getting at. One last story. I went to Christmas dinner at my. Do you have one of those families where there have been so many marriages and rearrangements that you can't really identify the person you're sitting next to at Christmas dinner? I'm at a relative's house. This relative's name is Alan. Alan is a retired guy. He plays golf and he watches television. He's really good at both of them. But he's an armchair agnostic, right? And so I'm walking into his home, and he knows I'm the religious guy in the family, and so he sees me coming, and he grabs the remote. Like I said, he's really good at this. It's like a 6-shooter. It's like do 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 do. As I'm walking towards the TV room where he is ensconced on the couch, he's flipping channels fast, because the moment I enter the room, he always lands on some sort of religious programming where there is gigantic hair. There are blazing white Nehru jackets. There are people falling and frothing, and it's just craziness, He looks for that, lands on it, and then I walk into the room and he goes, hey, here's your people, So one time he sees me coming, he grabs the remote, and he's like, do, 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 do. He didn't get very far. He's looking, they're doing some sort of documentary on the life of Jesus, and it's actually pretty good. So he starts watching it, and I start watching it. We both sit down, and it's actually really cool. They're showing 3D models of ancient Jerusalem based on, careful modeling and measurements. They're showing what Jesus might have looked like based on these skeletal features of ancient Semitic men and so on. Fascinating stuff. But if it's a biography of Jesus, eventually they're going to get to his death, right? And they get there. You know how these documentary goes? A screen comes up and it says, the death of Jesus. And it disappears. And then they interview scholars in front of books, or out in the quad, It's funny because they were interviewing people, and I knew almost everybody they were interviewing, just in the circles I hang out in. But these were not conservative scholars. These were mostly liberal scholars who don't believe Jesus came back from the dead, but they have something to say about the sources and about, they have lots of opinions about this. There were a couple of conservatives thrown into the mix, which I was very happy about. I mean, you don't see that very often. So in terms of the death of Jesus, this was strange because it didn't matter whether they were liberal, radical, conservative, or what. Across the board, every scholar that they interviewed affirmed, oh yeah, take it to the bank, done deal, knowable history, chisel it in stone in the history books. Jesus was a real historical figure, and he was killed by a Roman crucifixion team in first century Jerusalem. knowable history. Wow. I'm like, this is good. Then they get to the next segment. You know what's coming up. The resurrection. Then they interview the exact same scholars in front of the same books throughout the same quad. And except for the couple of conservatives, everybody was saying something like this. Well, who can know what happened so long, long ago in those tumultuous times? That's the sound of my head hitting the coffee table. Unbelievable. I'm shouting at the television. Suddenly, I'm the one falling and frothing, And I'm hollering at Alan, he's got the remote, looking at me kind of strange. I go, can you believe what they just did? The exact same body of evidence that led them all to believe that the death of Jesus by crucifixion was knowable history is one page over the exact same body of evidence that says he came back from the dead in his own body on the third day. This is no longer about evidence. This is about the fact that they are not willing to entertain the fact that a miracle might really have happened. So you can see. But that's what we're up against. Do miracles happen? Did this one happen? Most people, when they encounter any kind of talk about the resurrection, dismiss it very quickly because of the issue of miracles. They simply don't believe that supernatural events can happen. And by the way, I think we need to be careful with claims of miracles. We need to be careful with the word miracle, the miracle of childbirth. In some ways, in a personal response, it's miraculous. But, philosophically, it's not really a miracle, But somebody who is dead for 3 days coming back to life, that would be a legitimate miracle. The question is there good reason to believe that that happened? Right? In other words, it's funny that sometimes we as Bible-believing Christians are sometimes called narrow-minded, but I've discovered something. It's actually the other side that's too narrow. They're very narrow in terms of the scope of things that they will entertain, even on an academic level. In other words, if there's good evidence to believe that somebody came back from the dead, we, whose worldview does not exclude such things, are willing to entertain it. We ought not to embrace them too fast, but we're willing to entertain it. But those on the other side of the aisle, the more radical and skeptical and naturalistic, they simply rule it out from the get-go. So it doesn't matter how much evidence you can provide. Well, I do want to talk about the evidence. Some of you are going, I hope he gets to the evidence because, man, I got some guy, my uncle the physicist, who I've got to really give him the goods. Let's go through this. Now, I hope a lot of you have the handout. Everybody have a handout? Hold it up so those who don't can be jealous. Good. If you need one, I can have somebody come in and pass them around if you'd like. All right. Volunteers, if you have some handouts left over, could you bring some in and hand them out? They're gone? I understand. Okay, this means you're going to be very kind to your neighbor, okay, and share. They'll have a copy they can reproduce later, I'm sure. If not, I'll make sure you get one. But this is just to help organize the material, and it's actually a small handout. But let's go through this. How would I give evidence for the resurrection? What would I do? Well, there's the old style method. Some of us who grew up, and became Christians like in the late 70s and so on, maybe remember the stylings of Josh McDowell, where you basically make the case for the reliability of the New Testament, and then you study those documents carefully to find out what they say about the death and this purported resurrection of Jesus. And so you make your case entirely from the New Testament. And by the way, that is totally legitimate. If you can demonstrate that the New Testament documents are reliable eyewitness sources, then you're well on your way to showing that Jesus came back from the dead. Totally sound method. But it may not be the one that actually persuades your opponent, especially on a secular university campus. Why? Because they don't think the New Testament documents are reliable in any stretch. Even if you make a case for it, they're unlikely to believe it, right? So it's a lot more heavy lifting. Well, what if we took a different approach, right? You can certainly use the old Josh McDowell method. There's no problem with that. You're within your rights to do that. But what if we took a different approach so that we can make a bigger nuisance of ourselves on secular university campuses? What if we did this? What if we read all of the material written by our harshest critics? People who don't believe in Jesus the way we do, people who don't believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, people who are pretty skeptical and naturalistic and not likely to believe this at all, in fact, who don't believe this and have taken public stands in not believing this. What if we went to their material and started to read what they think really happened? Well, what's fascinating is you actually get a body of data from these folks. So you read through the radicals, the critics, so on, who don't believe like we do, and you can catalog their basic lists of common beliefs. And these are fairly uniform. Now, I've given you a list of these. They're called the 12 known historical facts concerning the resurrection events. And we ought to be able to consider these solid history. There are some new handouts beginning to circulate, so if you raise your hand, you'll be one of the lucky few. So 12 known historical facts concerning the resurrection events. These are facts that you can take to the bank. Why? Because both conservatives and radicals and liberals and critics believe these to be true. All right? If nothing else, there's not many things that qualify for real solid knowledge that everybody buys into, but these facts would, because anybody who's really studied this and has credentials and has done hard work, whether they're conservatives or liberals, believes in these 12 known historical facts. I'm going to walk through these quickly, and then we're going to see where we go next as good scientific thinkers. So, point number 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. Knowable historical fact. Jesus was a real historical figure, and he was killed by crucifixion. Notice it says he died by crucifixion. He didn't almost die by crucifixion. He died. Why do modern critical scholars believe that Jesus really did die? Because, you know what? We know something more about crucifixion these days. Right? In fact, they've actually studied this in laboratories with graduate students. They bring in the graduate student, if he's done poorly on his comprehensive exams, and they nail him to a cross. No, they don't actually use the nails, but they do tie these grad students to cross beams, right? And let their feet dangle and give them little pegs to stand on and give them various postures and positions. And they discovered something. It is very distressing, right? If you're hanging on a cross, and the distressing part is you can't breathe. Why? Because your arms are up and you're hanging by the weight of your body, and in order to get a decent breath, you've got to lift up. Now, if you've been crucified, you've been nailed to a cross, you're pushing up on nails and pulling up on nails in your hands and in your feet. And that's excruciating. That's where we get the term excruciating, in fact. It's very, very painful. So, if you have to push up to get a decent breath, if you're just hanging there, guess what? You're dead. You're not getting proper air exchange, and people who are crucified, they don't really die by bleeding and so on, unless they've been beaten to a pulp ahead of time. They died by asphyxiation. So through this kind of evidence, even critical scholars believe that Jesus died by crucifixion. Second fact, Jesus was buried. Now notice that's not saying much. These are called minimal facts. You don't really unpack them a great deal, otherwise scholars start falling off. But everybody agrees there was a burial in the story. In fact, I think you might be able to expand fact number 2 to give a little bit more meat to it. Critical scholars are really coming around to the fact that it was the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And I won't get into all the reasons for that. Don't have time this morning, but that's growing in popularity. It's not made the list yet, but Jesus was buried. You can take that part to the bank. Number 3, Jesus' death caused the disciples to despair and lose hope, believing that his life was ended. Knowable history. Number 4, the tomb was discovered to be empty just a few days later. The empty tomb. Right? The empty tomb doesn't prove a resurrection, but it proves there's an empty tomb, right? And it has to be explained. Somehow you've got an empty tomb in the story, and the empty tomb shows up in every source that even the critical scholars embrace as authentic. So you got to deal with the empty tomb. It's knowable history. Even our harshest critics believe that there was an empty tomb in the story. Number 5, Jesus had experiences which the disciples had experiences which they believed were literal appearances of the risen Jesus. Wow. And that has to be explained. Number 6, you might want to put a star by number 6. This is quite a fact. In fact, I'm not sure you need the rest of them if you've got number 6. That's how powerful it is. Number 6, the disciples were transformed from doubters who were afraid to identify themselves with Jesus to bold proclaimers of his death and resurrection. Knowable history. Even the critics believe this transformation took place, and that transformation, therefore, has to be explained. Very powerful. And by the way, we know that many of the disciples went on to their deaths proclaiming this. We don't have solid evidence for all of the disciples, but we have pretty good evidence that Peter, Paul, and James certainly went to their death proclaiming these beliefs. So that adds a little bit of wonder to the whole thing. Number 7, this message, that is the resurrection message, was the center of preaching in the early church. One might ask, how did it become the center of preaching? That is the resurrection message if it didn't really happen, you know? How did it become so central and powerful in terms of the message? I mean, why not? There's so many other things to choose from in the life of Jesus. Love God with all your mind, the Sermon on the Mount, all kinds of things, all of his parables. He could have picked something to become the real cornerstone and center point of preaching, but they picked the resurrection. Why? Well, in my view, it's because it really happened, you know. But that's the question that has to be answered. How did that become the center of preaching? Number 8, the resurrection message was especially proclaimed in Jerusalem, where Jesus died and was buried shortly before. That fact gives a geographical placement to all of this. And it's problematic because if the resurrection idea is a myth or a legend, then really it should have had a better chance of evolving or ramping up in a different region because there were people who could have pulled the plug on this whole operation in Jerusalem. In other words, if it's a myth or if it's a legend, you'd expect it to arise in Antioch or Alexandria or Corinth or Rome or someplace, not in Jerusalem in the lifetime of the people who were witnesses. So that's got to be explained. Number 9, as a result of the preaching of the resurrection, the church was born and grew. Explaining the birth and growth of Christianity is very difficult. Everything was set against this. Everything. I mean, very different than Islam. Islam was a religion that moved forward at the edge of a sword. I mean, if you had enough guys who with swords on your team, you could actually move into the next region and conquer it for Islam. That's not the way Christianity worked. It was a religion of persuasion. What got these guys out there so wild-eyed to present this gospel no matter what it meant to their livelihoods or their well-being? That's a question that has to be answered. What got the church going and what caused it to grow? One answer, of course, would be, this guy came back from the dead. Don't you understand? That is a game changer, right? That can motivate a group of people, and that has to be dealt with. Number 10, this might be nearly as strong as number 6. Sunday became the primary day of worship. Why is that an important fact? Because it started with Jewish people, and Jewish people worship when? Sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, right? The traditional Jewish Sabbath. How do you get a bunch of Jews to suddenly shift and start worshiping on a Sunday morning? Something huge had to have happened in their midst to shake them so much that they would, overturn thousands of years of tradition to start worshiping Jesus. And they started meeting on Sunday morning because that was the traditional time of resurrection. So that has to be dealt with. Number 11, James, who had been a skeptic, was converted to the faith when he also believed he saw the resurrected Jesus. And number 12, a few years later, Paul was also converted by an experience which he likewise believed to be an appearance of the risen Jesus. So there are 12 known historical facts. You can take those to the bank. Even our harshest critics agree with these. By the way, the architect of this kind of methodology is my good friend Gary Habermas. He teaches in our Apologetics program. He does our course on the resurrection in our distance learning program. So think about that. I mean, this is a dynamite technique. I've seen him use it on secular campuses. I've used it on secular campuses, and it really does get a fresh hearing for this material. Well, here's the deal, and this is what galls me sometimes when people think that I am really all about blind leaping. That's what religion is. That's what you're about, Hazen. You're one of those religion guys who simply at one time was either dropped on his head or you decided to close your eyes and leap blindly into the religious abyss. There's no knowledge there. There's no science there. There's nothing, except blind faith. Well, this is what drives me nuts. This is the center point of my faith, this resurrection of Jesus. And I've got these 12 known facts, and now I'm going to be eminently scientific because I'm going to try to find a theory that fits these facts. Don't forget, these are facts that even our harshest critics agree to. So if I can find a theory that captures these, I'm being very scientific in my approach, am I not? I think so. Well, let's try on a few. There's a finite number of theories that have come down through history, and we'll try a couple of these out. Now, if you turn your handout over, you have a chart that looks something like this. This organizes it. I stole the basic format from a Josh McDowell book, but if you find any errors, they're mine. There are occupied tomb theories, and there are empty tomb theories. And empty tomb theories can be broken down into natural and supernatural theories. And what I've done is I've listed a bunch of names of theories. I'm not going to go over all of these. Some of these are noteworthy. Some of these are not noteworthy. But here's the fun part. At the bottom, I've given you some numbers. These numbers correspond to the 12 known historical facts. And these numbers correspond to the known historical facts that do not fit the theory. So we're really looking for a theory that says none. We're looking for a theory that says we've dealt with all the known historical facts in this particular theory. Let's try a few of these on for size. Let's start at the far left, the unknown tomb theory. The unknown tomb theory says, the body of Jesus was buried in a common pit grave unknown to his disciples. Therefore, the resurrection account arose out of the ignorance as to the whereabouts of the body. That's not grabbing any of you. That's actually a theory from France in the late 1800s, so there you go. I know you're a Francophone country, but nonetheless, that doesn't warm my heart. But more importantly, it misses on data points numbers 4 through 12. It hits the fact that Jesus died by crucifixion, that he was buried in some general way, thrown into a common pit grave, that his disciples were despairing and had lost hope. But it misses on the rest of them. For instance, it misses on the idea that the tomb was discovered to be empty just a few days later. If Jesus is thrown into a common pit grave, then the tomb doesn't even play a role in this story, and the tomb has to play a role in the story, even according to our modern critics. So that's not a very good theory. The wrong tomb theory, you can see from the numbers that it's one data point better than the unknown tomb theory. For instance, the wrong tomb theory says this: the women came to the wrong tomb, for there were many similar tombs in Jerusalem. They found an open tomb and a young man who denied that this was Jesus' tomb. The frightened women mistakenly identified the man as an angel and fled. All right, that's a theory. Now, by the way, we all know this is kind of cockamamie right at the get-go, don't we? Because women went to the tomb. Women wouldn't have gone to the wrong tomb. Why? Because women ask for directions. Yeah. I mean, this actually bore in upon me when I started to think about Peter. I could totally imagine Peter going, like, dude, I totally know where it is, So the wrong tomb theory misses on data points 5 through 12, but it's one data point better than the unknown tomb theory. It at least solved the problem of the empty tomb, right? Jesus was buried around the corner in another tomb. They went to the wrong one, and voila, you've got an explanation for that. But it's fairly miserable on the rest of the data points. Well, let's move over to the next one. As you can see, this is a doozy. It misses on all 12 facts. Yet here's the thing, this legend theory is by far the most popular theory. This is the theory that uncle, the physicist of yours, is going to present to you at your Thanksgiving dinner table and so on. Ugh. And the legend theory simply says that the resurrection was a fabrication that evolved over a lengthy period to vindicate a leader long since dead. It's a legend. It's like Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox, for goodness sake. You know that stuff. We've seen this all through history. I'm sure there probably was a guy named Jesus, and he was a lovely man, and he had followers, and they were weeping, and they started telling stories about him, and the stories grew, and after a couple of generations, you got this Jesus who was a pretty nice guy, and maybe could actually make people feel better through his interesting stories. By a couple of generations, he's walking on water, he's multiplying loaves and fishes, and he's coming back from the dead. You know how that stuff goes. Problem is, it misses on all 12 data points, for goodness sakes. I think it's very important if people bring up the legend theory, like, oh, that's kind of all legendary. Say, you know what, that does not add up. There are even critical scholars would not accept that for a second, because there is some known historical data to work with. So the legend theory's out. The twin theory. Now, this isn't bad. It only misses on 2 data points, right? Numbers 4 and 11. The twin theory says this: Jesus died and was buried. But soon thereafter, his long-lost identical twin brother emerges on the scene and is worshipped as the risen Christ. Not bad. Pretty clever. I've got twin boys. This is plausible, Now, I'm saying that the twin theory misses on data points number 4 and 11. Number 4 is a very important one. The tomb was discovered to be empty just a few days later, right? So Jesus A is crucified and put in a tomb. Jesus B appears on the scene. Where's Jesus A? Still in the tomb, right? So if anybody had any doubts about Jesus B, they could at least go check the tomb. I mean, half the people in this room would be inclined to do that because we're talking about our resurrection here. You'd be inclined to check it out. Or at least run down to make the empty tomb a shrine or something, something like that. It also misses on data point number 11. James, who had been a skeptic, was converted to the faith when he also believed he saw the resurrected Jesus. Why would this be a problem? Because James was his brother. What do you think, Mary didn't tell him there were twins? My wife had twins. Man, it doesn't matter if there's cattle lowing and wise men wandering around and angels and so on. She would have remembered there were 2 babies in there. She wouldn't have forgotten that. And you also have to have the explanation of how one just suddenly was, carried off by wolves or something? I don't know. It would certainly change the Christmas plays that our children are in. So you've got James here. Now, think about this. This actually relates to point number 4. So Jesus A is on the scene. He's crucified and he's put in the tomb. Then Jesus B appears on the scene. All right? Picture this, kind of like a conversation between Jesus and James. James is looking him over. He goes, that's weird. He goes, he's thinking to himself, how come this Jesus has a farmer's tan and the other Jesus, the old Jesus had a carpenter's tan. What's that about? Let's just say James had some skepticism because maybe Jesus B was speaking with a different dialect because he was raised in another region or something, So James is skeptical. And he could have pulled one of these stunts. Hey, Jesus. James, good to see you. Jesus, hey, remember Dad? Oh yeah, remember Dad. Remember when Dad used to eat spaghetti? He'd get one of those long strands all covered with sauce, and he'd start sucking on it, and it would start flipping like a airplane propeller, and get sauce all over us and him and everything else. And Jesus goes, oh yeah, that was so funny. And James goes, gotcha. Dad hated spaghetti. This just shows that James was in a position to find out what was really going on, And of course, this all begs the question of Jesus A still being in the tomb, based on these known historical facts. So the twin theory is clever, but it really doesn't do much good. There's the hallucination theory. You can use your imagination on that. There's the existential resurrection, which basically says Jesus didn't come back from the grave. He rose in my heart. It's all about what goes on inside of me, That's not going anywhere. There's a spiritual resurrection. Jesus rose in spirit only. The disciples stole the body. That's literally the oldest one in the book. You can read refutations of that one everywhere. It misses on many data points, though. The authorities hid the body. That never made sense to anybody. But here's one called the swoon theory. This isn't bad. Only misses on 2 data points, right? The swoon theory says this. Jesus did not die on the cross. He fainted from exhaustion. The cold temperature and the spices revived him. Now, this theory misses on data point number 1, which we've already talked a little bit about. Jesus died by crucifixion. That's why this is not popular in academic circles. Even the most critical scholars don't think that this theory is sound, but it'll be back. Guaranteed, it'll be back. So it misses on data point number 1. It also misses on data point number 6, interestingly, that the disciples were transformed from doubters to bold proclaimers of the resurrection. Why is that an issue? Well, think about it. So Jesus is crucified, and he appears to be dead. His breathing is so shallow and his pulse so imperceptible. They think he's dead. They bring him down from the cross. They start to wrap him in spiced linens, and they put him in the cool of the tomb. Now, the spiced linens act like a kind of smelling salt, right? And he wakes up. There he is. Oh my goodness. So Jesus, now stay with me. This gets totally implausible, but we have to carry this to the bitter end, you know. So Jesus is in the cool of the tomb. He's been revived by the spices. And in his weakened condition, he's able to unwrap enough of these, weighty bandages to get loose. And then he either tunnels out or moves the stone, right? Now, once he's out, he either sneaks past or overpowers the guard, right? Now, he walks into Jerusalem. Of course, I picture him in bandages, so he does a mummy walk, And he makes his way into Jerusalem, and he's looking for his band of merry men and women. And he's a male, so he doesn't ask for directions, so he makes a couple of wrong turns. And then he finally gets there. Now, he's been through a flogging and a crucifixion, so he's in terrible shape. So he makes it to their door, and he's knocking very weakly, And he's starting to slide down the door. They open the little hatch. They don't see him. He knocks again. And by this time, he's completely in a heap. They open the door, and there he is in a pool, Jesus. You see the problem here? At that point, you say, he is risen. He is risen indeed. Glory. Hallelujah. No. You pick him up and you go, quick, everybody, let's get him down to Jerusalem General Hospital, for a period of treatment. That's what you do. So that's why the swoon theory, although it misses only on 2 data points, they're doozies and it's out of favor. So you're left with 2. Jesus was an alien, or he came back bodily from the dead. Jesus was an alien. So it's your choice. You probably want a little bit of comment on the Jesus was an alien business. I wish I had more time for this, but here it is. So I went to one of these whole earth expos or New Age fairs or something, and there were these guys at a booth. And they were just all over the idea that extraterrestrials are responsible for most of what goes on planet Earth that's mysterious. And one of those was the resurrection of Jesus. So I engaged these guys in a conversation, and it was so fascinating. I spent a good deal of time with them. And by the time I was done chatting with them, I was agreeing with them. Because they had the most bizarre explanations. Okay, you have to understand something, Hazen. See, there's this cloaked mothership around Earth. They'd watched way too much Star Trek, And wouldn't you think that they have the ability to beam in and beam out? Let's say Jesus is about to be crucified and they beam in some, like a character like Data from Star Trek, The Next Generation, and he's clothed exactly like Jesus. They can even sprinkle Jesus DNA if they wanted to on him, And just before they pound the nails in, they beam in this guy, and it's him getting crucified. Of course, he could handle that, He's an android. And they put him on the cross, and at some point they send down a signal to turn him off, They take him down. He's a little bit heavier than they expected because he's made out of metal or something. They put him in the tomb, and they send down another signal to reboot him, You can see why I hung around the booth for a while. This is way entertaining. So they're making this case that, given all of these like alien technologies, this can all be explained. I'm like, you've got to be kidding, But then it dawned on me, wait a minute. I think you guys are right. And they're like, what? I don't think they were getting much of that. Yeah, I think you're onto something here. Now, I wouldn't characterize it the same way that you are. I wouldn't say that Jesus is like a space alien, like a spaceman. You guys have been watching way too much Star Trek, I said. But he is an alien in this respect. He's not calling on the mothership for special powers. He's calling on the Father. That's the real explanation that fits the entire picture. So you guys are missing a couple of pieces and a couple of screws maybe too. You're missing a couple of pieces. But yes, Jesus was indeed an alien, not of this world, calling upon the Father for dramatic results. Well, at that point, this idea shifts over to the supernatural column. You see, Jesus was alive at point A, dead at point B, and alive again at point C. And the historical record is quite compelling on that issue. So compelling that if we catalog the facts of the case, even taking those from our harshest critics, we get a resurrection in the package. Okay, does this prove beyond a shadow of a doubt? Maybe. Does this prove in some sort of mathematical way? No, nothing does like that. But do we have excellent reason to believe that Jesus came back from the dead? Yes. This, in my view, annihilates this notion, this charge against us of blind faith and blind leaping. We can know this happened. I can claim to know it happened because I have excellent reason to believe it. Right? This is not about blind leaping. This is not just about something going on inside of me, some wish fulfillment or some illusion or intuition. This is the real deal. In a room this size, it strikes me that some people are facing death. Some people have loved ones who are facing death. This is the great message of hope. Jesus really did conquer death, and we can know it. And we will one day follow him. He was the first fruits from among the dead, coming back to live forever, and we will one day follow him. He has left a tremendous trail of evidence back through history, testifying about this amazing event that's central to our belief and central to the hope of humankind.